Okay, welcome everyone to today's Hot Topics and Research Ethics webinar. I'm Joe Ali. I'm a faculty member at Johns Hopkins and a core faculty member of the Master of Research Ethics Studies program, which is a collaborative program of Johns Hopkins Berman Institute of Bioethics and University of Malaya School of Faculty of Medicine. I'm joined today by my colleague at University of Malaya, Julia Patrick Ngasan. Julia will be introducing our speaker shortly, but before we do that, we just wanted to quickly introduce this speaker series. So as I mentioned, this is a series that has started in October 2020, and we've had a number of different speakers present on different topics, current issues in research ethics from different institutions around the world. All of these prior talks are recorded and are available on our program's website. We'll provide a link in a moment to that in the chat. But the seminar series is being hosted, as I said, by a Master of Health Research Ethics program, which is supported by the U.S. National Institutes of Health Fogarty International Center. And it's a collaborative program that we developed together between our institutions to offer training in health research ethics. It's a one-year full-time program offered at the University of Malaya. The applications are received every year on May 31st, with an cohort intake every September. Because of our funding, we're able to offer 10 scholarships to applicants from low and middle-income countries in the Southeast Asian region. And we'd welcome anyone who's interested to send an inquiry to the program via email. So just a few logistics before we jump right in. As most webinars these days are, there's an opportunity for you to ask questions. We'll have about 45 minutes of presentation followed by 15 minutes of question and discussion. If you do have a question at any time, please feel free to post it into the chat or the Q&A window and we'll take them in turn. The session's being recorded, and as I said, it will be made available afterwards on the Master of Health Research Ethics website at UM, as well as the Berman Institute website. So without further ado, let me hand over to my colleague Julia to introduce our speaker today in the presentation. So Julia, over to you.
All right, thanks, Joe. So good morning from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I'm Julia. I'm part of the Mora program as well, and I have the pleasure to introduce our speaker for the hot topics today. Right, so just a bit on Prof. Vina, got many qualifications. So she graduated as a doctor with MBBS in 1987 and subsequently further her studies in forensic medicine in 1996. She holds 2 postgraduate diploma. First one is in law and ethics, another one in human rights law. Subsequently, she did master in bioethics with Erasmus Mundus program. And finally, just recently, she earned her PhD with Institute of Ethics Ireland just less than a couple of years ago. Right, so very fortunate to have Prof. Vina with us today. And currently, she is the Director, Center for Ethics of Yenepoya University, and she is also the professor of Department of Forensic Medicine and Toxicology in Yenepoya Medical College as well. Prof. Vina, we're indeed very lucky to have you with us, and over to you then.
Shall I?
Yes.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, good evening, because we are from across the world. So I'm very happy to be and privileged to be here with you all, sharing certain thoughts on participation of women in research from low and middle income countries' perspectives. And this is not a research that is carried out by me, but this I'm trying to wrap up from our expectations and the conversation that goes on with the research participants and with the communities that we are dealing with. We have 2 communities, that is one with the transgender community and with the primitive tribal group communities, what they think about research and how they would like the research to be focused on them and what would be needed So I've given this the LMIC perspectives because this is quite along the lines of the article that I will be quoting. So once again, thank you for inviting me. And it's my privilege to be with such elite group like Johns Hopkins, because Joe Ali and Professor Joe Ali and Professor Suguman have been my mentors, even otherwise when I was in Johns Hopkins and on any other issue. And to the more group with Yulia, who I've met before. It is when we meet that we exchange ideas. And with these, we get stimulated, and we would like to do better into bioethics. So thank you for inviting me. So I'm going to dwell on what it means to be a woman. In other words, who is a woman, and challenges of being a woman from LMIC. So is it different from being a woman elsewhere? I'm bringing the LMIC perspectives. Challenges with transitions in life of a woman. What happens with those transitions, and what is the burden that gets added on? Healthcare disparity and bringing equity. And now, if there is a disparity in healthcare, and then how does that reflect on the research? And what is bioeconomy and research focusing on the felt needs of the women? Would that be a better thing? And how would that be? And how should that look like? So I start with who is a woman? So there are a lot of definitions to it. Dictionary as well as social scientists have put it in different ways. But from Indian perspective, I would say from the time that you are born, you get saddled with one or the other burden. As a younger age group, it is the increasing mortality of the girls. In the teenagers, there are other questions because there is no advice on contraception, but age for marriage is 18. And any time before that you're pregnant, the boy is held liable. And then the care burden, which goes on and on. And lastly, I've shown the picture of a transgender person. Of course, she has gone to make a name and fame because of the plight of the transgenders that she has brought to the light. So woman, the Webster's primary definition, where for man it reads as an individual human, especially an adult male human, and the individual of the sex that is capable of producing small, usually motile gametes, such as spermatozoa. So that is more of, you could say, a biological definition, especially in that of a girl, an individual of the sex that is typically capable of bearing our children or producing eggs. Now, this again leaves out a group, a significant group, which may not be able to be fitting into this definition. So, unpacking what it is to be a woman. And according to Collins Dictionary, woman is an adult female human being, a female person associated with particular place, activity, and occupation. A woman, female, lady are nouns referring to an adult female human being, and on the paradigm of gender and biological sex for adult human beings. In 2017, this definition was questioned, and a reader some of them wanted the definition to change, while some other group persisted on retaining the same definition. Because in Collins later on, there was this communication from the dictionary, the currently reviewing all gender-related vocabulary. We want to make sure that we accurately reflect evolution in the vocabulary of gender and sexuality, where gender is a social and a cultural concept, where sex we take in relation to the biological differentiation. Now, when we say it is gender is more to do with the culture. In India, when you know that somebody is pregnant and sex determination is a taboo, it's not done unless there's a medical indication because of increasing female feticide. So then, once they deliver, you get served these orange circles. These are called jalebis. That means a girl is born. And if you have a packet of these brown small thingies that are called pedas, that means a boy is born. So it's so culturally relevant to be even asking on phone, what sweet is it? It shows what do they belong to, whether they belong to male or female group. But then we haven't given much thought to what happens and what is served when the sex is not differentiated at birth. So what is a woman, whether it's a biologically, are we looking at whether it's a sexual differentiation? or genetical confirmation, or a self-identity which is gender, or orientation like a lesbians, gay, bisexuals, or transgender and queer, and other which are in the spectrum. I'm told there are about 26 different spectrums, who self-identify themselves as a sex assigned, and whenever there is an incongruity with the sex assigned to the person's feeling they belong to different gender, then it's a transgender. The hormonal fluctuation and necessity to be on hormones for a transgender transitioned into male or female. Again, this is not clear, at least from Indian setup, whether they come under transgender, because the survey only looks at numbers who said they are other group, male, female, and other. Caregiving role, whatever it is, if you are a female, the caregiving role is beyond biological limits. The care burden that a lady has is much more and much beyond the biological limit. Actually, this is a picture of intersectionality, intersection, which is first described by Kimberly Crenshaw. And at every level you see, when they intersect, there is a vulnerability that is set in. These multiple factors influence a person's multidimensional understanding of identity. So whether which gender, which color, which race, which economic status, place you come from, they all intersect each other. And some of us may feel we are at a comfortable level, maybe with race, but we're not so comfortable when it comes to gender because there's a huge discrimination. Similarly, brown color, female, coming from an undeveloped country, has got some other associated burdens to carry. So the power dynamics role in multiplicity and complexity, because these intersectionalities in race, gender, economy, age, job, they all have, you could say, a proportionality of the advantage to the disadvantaged, and at what place you are located. And many a times, I feel I'm very comfortable because at least I'm educated. I'm a lady working outside. At the same time, there are equally others who are educated, but without a job. They cannot support anyone, nor their family. So this kind of intersectionality helps one understand at one point you are okay in one sector, but in the other domains, you may be lacking. So overlapping, that is why Audre Lorde expressed that there is no such thing as a single issue struggle. You don't struggle because of single issues, but it just develops into a complex issues. Now coming back to being a female. So what happens now, the picture depicts the person you see reading a list is the father of the boy who is married to the girl. The girl is nowhere in the picture because in the marriage affairs as well, the girl is not seen in the front line, but it's only the parents. So the father has promised to give a list of things in marriage, which is called dowry. And this has not been given. So there's a continuous demand for it, and the girl's father feels squeezed. This is why one of the burdens a parent experience when a girl is born is that so much burden to carry. We need to get her married. We need to give half of our literally life earnings in the name of marriage, or literally 1/3 of it. So a girl is then thought as a burden or a liability. So the power inequality could be political, social, religious in many, in economic, especially in the lowest strata, and gender-based as well as in legal status. So power relations are tightly secured and maintained. And who is enjoying a power relation always thinks it is his right for that. And if somebody is deprived, that is not his concern. So sexism is the foundation on which all tyranny is built, says Andrea Dwork. So again, talking of the intersectionality. Now, whenever we see in the present crisis all over, the intersectionality comes into picture. It's either because of the race or gender, but in some countries, it's also because of the caste, the differentiation in the caste, the lower caste and the higher caste, the nation, and those who don't have a nation, who are immigrants, and the disability and the religion that you belong that might put you into this particular place of vulnerability. So intersectionality brings associated oppression due to classism, homophobia, xenophobia, nativism, ageism, ableism, it's Islamophobia, and there are different vulnerable groups. But the question is, at one point you feel so strong, but then so soon you might find yourself in any of this when there is a change in the scenario. Now, for a female, it is most of the time in this section of intersectionality, there are lots and lots of vulnerabilities. So the matrix of domination, now this is just showing a matrix of domination, and this explains actually how overall organization of power is in a society, and based on these criteria of race, class, ability, language, appearance, sexuality, and gender. So if you're in the privileged class, things work out well, but there are also certain combinations where you're in a privileged class, but you're disabled, or you are in a gender which is like transgender, you have no access to education or anything, or appearance wise, you're very young, you may have everything at your command, or you could have nothing at all because you have lost opportunities. So it's an intersectionality and matrix of domination, which speaks about identifying mutually constructing features of oppression. What causes the oppression? And why is it difficult to get out of this? Because if there is a remedy for that, that answers a lot of inequity that is happening in the low middle income countries. If we can address this issue of how best to evolve within the inequalities, how best to address the needs of a woman, then it would be a great thing to do. Because whenever we have enrolled women in the clinical trials or in the social science trials, often we find that they may not turn up on the time that we want them to, on the day that we want them to. Why? Because we give them a list of dates that they need to come for follow-up. But many a times they do not even follow this particular calendar, but of the full moon and the new moon. And according to them, on a particular day, they cannot come because they have to celebrate or they're fasting and they cannot take medicines. So they're not there. So whenever we are considering women, especially in case of the rural areas where they do not have an access to healthcare, when they enroll, because at least a least bit of hospital checkup and the facility they get out of enrolling. But then that also we need to consider that it is not in their hands to come, because they are only a part of carers in the family. They can only come if the family allows them to do so on that particular day. So especially when we look at their status in anemia, we used to read in textbooks that more than 5 hemoglobin, it's not even less than 5 is not 5 grams, is not tenable with life. But we have seen construction workers with 4 of hemoglobin and they just pull on with pregnancy. So the question is, chronic severe anemia, working over a long time, especially even during pregnancy, sometimes the lactational status and the menstruation and menopause, they bring their own set of mental, physical problems. And they are not a part of our kind of research that we need to address. And so many times people have told us, we enrolled into research. And then I said, what is it? No, we thought we will be fine, but we are not. So the idea when they enrolled into research is you're not so well, you will be well. It's a kind of mentality that you take. Research is healthcare. So both the things are equally, or they can say they're treated as on the same platform because they're going to doctors. And the vulnerability issues of pregnancy and during research, and especially when regarding with the follow-up, it's very difficult to convince somebody the dates are important to keep. You have to come on this particular day, you have to write in your diary that this you have visited and this is what has happened. It's very difficult because some people do not go by dates. In fact, my own lady who works in the house for me in the mornings, if I tell her come on Tuesday, Wednesday, she wouldn't know Tuesday, Wednesday. I have to talk in relation to today, 2 days later, 3 days later, because they don't even follow this calendar. So then you're on 2 different platforms. You're talking to them on month and days and weeks, and they want to know how many days after the full moon. And every full moon has got a different name for it. So sometimes we are confused as to how do we call them. And even when they say they've consented, yes, they've consented. They said, yes, we did. But we did not say that on that particular day and time we will go. But when it's possible, we can. Because that's a very interesting thing to look at, how time is perceived by people in different regions, which is actually a different study altogether. That's chronomics. And how much importance they give to the hour or the minutes or a days. So that is how it's difficult to get on that particular day and time. And the challenges for the girl child especially, because 30% of people in South Asia, girls are married while they're still children. That means the child marriages still occur. In fact, in COVID times, we found the child marriages had gone up. Even up to the age of 12, they were married off because less mouths to feed, less people to care, decongestion of the house. So these examples highlight how gender power relations are profoundly affect adolescent girls also with lifelong consequences. Because for the parents, it's a marriage. But for the girl, the whole life ahead of her removed from school. So puberty is a formative period of rapid physical, cognitive, social, emotional, and sexual development. So there are differences, and the way they respond to it is not understood by the parents even, and there is not much of a care given because it is treated as very physiological. So, okay, so what? If she is matured, she's matured. So the bleeding problems many a times are not even got to the, she's not even got for a checkup. So the gender roles and gender inequalities become ingrained in the society, in the fabric of society, and it does not raise eyebrows if some untoward happens to a teenage girl. Like yesterday we were doing autopsy on a 17-year-old girl who committed suicide by hanging. And the reason, because she didn't have a contraceptive advice, she became pregnant. She didn't want to malign the parents, a kind of bad name for my family. And you think that this should not be, these are preventable. And you should not be losing children because you don't have an advice for them. But that's again not allowed because 18 is the age in India for consensual sexual intercourse. So these are some of the things that we look at in the whole fabric of society, that are we paying attention to our puberty, girls in puberty or in teenagers, and how best to give a hand that helps them. So gender norms that encourage men to be strong and take risks, they partly explain the health harming risk of behavior of boys, but the gender inequalities particularly harmful to the sexual and reproductive health of adolescent girls. And it also reverberates with lifelong effects of sexually transmitted diseases, HIV, and others. Because once married, a girl cannot move back into parental home. When we were counseling a lady, because twice she tried to commit suicide, and we didn't do the autopsy because she actually she survived for 6 hours the first time. And when she survived, she was at home. They were not even bringing her to hospital because that would give a bad name. That would be a police case, and attempted suicide will be punished. But later on, when they brought her, and we went into, because we wanted to see what the ligature mark looks like when she survived 6 hours. So she told us that, okay, she has been wanting to marry somebody, she's not able to do so. But when they have a repeated call for attention, which they don't get. So in the end is, she said, I'm going to be married off, and she did get married off. The question is, I'm just thinking, when will it be that when she has had enough, and again she'll go to try, and then this time be successful? Because once you're married, usually parents say, if you come back, your sisters don't get married. You are labeled as the one who has left her, whose husband has left her. So even the onus of coming back depends on the boy, and the power is not with the girl. So that is why when we look at overall into the understanding inequalities in global research, what are the factors that operate at the individual level, at the family level, and the child marriages often compromising the child's development, schools being interrupted, and opportunities become limited, increased risk of domestic violence, and lack of economic power, because at the age of 12 or 13, or even 16 if you get married, you have not had schooling. You have no jobs open for you except to do a menial job, which the family would not like to. Or even if they like you to do, the burden is much more because the menial job barely gets you anything. So increased risk of adolescent mortality. So the unmet needs of the society, this is where I think we need to focus on when we do the research. And in that especially, are women the stakeholders when research is carried out in the community? Although we think, we advise, we promote, but we find that the research agenda is not set by the women in the community. Is the research addressing the needs of the community? Again, when we were trying to talk to the primitive tribal group, there are only 16,000 of them, and about 14,500 stay near Mangalore, where I'm working. So the main problem is the mortality. That is around 55 is the age at which people in their community die. But then they said, everybody would like to do research on us, take our blood. In fact, they're going to establish the genetic tree, but they said there is nothing in it, which is for why we are dying so soon. So is the research driven by other agendas, which in most of the cases could also be, but then as a LMIC perspective, if you want to improve their living, then we need to be looking at what are their problems. From the ground, if you look at LMICs, girls are viewed as less capable to assure us them, and then they have to keep up their family honor. Their restriction on mobility, sexuality, reproductive capacity are perceived. Accepted codes of social conduct, legal systems, and even some communities, if they beat up their girl child, the boys are rewarded because you are respecting, you're trying to instill some respect in them. Because in one of the studies my postgraduate done in the engineering colleges, the simple case study of whether a case scenario and the husband beats the wife, she's made a mistake, she beats repeatedly, and some of the questions on that, the girls who are literally final years and then who are past engineering, they say it's okay for a husband to beat if she has made a mistake. But the reverse is not true. They can never beat a man. So the whole question of accepting a social conduct, is it a accepted behavior and later on victimization becomes something that is learned as a learned behavior from the children, is something that we also need to question. So burdens first, then the rest. This attitude of increasing burden on the caregivers, especially who are the women, and who are also punching bags in the system, because in most of the households, only girls are taught how to behave, how to be like a girl, how to be a good daughter-in-law, but the boys are not taught how to respect girls. So as a result, most of the families, we have this woman who's like a punching bag. Anything untoward happens in the family, she gets literally bashed for it. So that is why the caregiving burden is something when we need to look at how best can this be dialogued, and how best can we cultivate that everybody takes the burden equally. And since women outlive men, they have much more aging burden along with loneliness burden, and likely to they are being more likely to be caregivers even in the last days of their life. So especially married, disabled, geriatric women, because we also have a geriatric clinic, and we have interviewed some of the geriatric population because we were trying to look at what is the single concern for geriatric age group that can be remedied. And one of them that came out largely was their accessing the social utilities. It was very difficult for them. So even if they were living at the age of 80, they had to go out and get it for them. So much neglect of research and care on transgender aging population. And I think before I end, I would also like to talk about the surrogacy market in India. So there again, we see the power differentials coming. There is a lot of talk of India being a very forward country, because we had a surrogacy market open, more than 25,000 children were being born through surrogacy market. It was worth 2 billion industry. Domestic demand was also increasing. And 50% of these were commissioned by overseas, 50% by domestic people, I mean the natives of India. But then came a bill that stopped the surrogacy, from especially a ban on the baby outsourcing, and this put an end to autonomy over the rights and use of bodies of the females. And in the process, some people think it also violated the basic and the civil fundamental right, a reproductive right. So what was the fine balance? Sorry, this is a very busy slide. I just wanted to show you a newspaper cutting of the industry. And the surrogacy market. See here, one of the lady who has been a surrogate, she says, what my husband makes is just enough for us to scrape by. But what I make from this being a surrogate, that's about 5,000 US dollars, will help me buy a house. But with the new surrogacy bill, no compensation is paid to the surrogate. Only altruistic surrogacy is encouraged. So the idea being, unwed girls, college girls, were also using this as a means for their education, which they could pay later. So now you make a bill, is that it's invasive of bodily labor, or is that taking away your autonomy? So ways in which human bodies are treated, and is that a part of bioeconomy one should be encouraging? Or if you are discouraging it, what other structures, supportive structures should be in place so that the person can get by into social health? And addressing the structural dimensions of gender equality, women should be included in clinical trials and other studies in appropriate numbers, so that the data generated from such research should be analyzed using gender-sensitive tools and methods. Many a times, this does not happen. We just have a mass of, because we say that it will be, data will be anonymized, but we still do not apply gender-sensitive tools to understand what the data stands for and in what way it can be helped. The research funding body should promote research that broadens the scope of health and the research and linking of other researchers, so that we have a good amount of information coming in what way to improve. Biomedical and social dimensions, including gender consideration, and strengthen women's role in health research, redressing gender imbalances, and also in funding publication and advisory bodies. So we need to do sex-specific health conditions research, and also on the sex-specific needs in health conditions. Because in certain health conditions, where the gender again is not brought into as an instrument how to help, and healthcare or the research factor should figure in, and in a large way support the inability of the women to look after themselves. So over a period of time, women have been made to adopt contradictory roles. The strength of a woman is evoked to ensure women effectively play traditional roles as daughters, mothers, wives, but then there is not much of a voice that is heard. And on the other hand, stereotype of weak and helpless women is fostered to ensure complete dependence of male sex. At the same time, when I'm speaking this, it is not that everyone in India is vulnerable, every female is vulnerable, but I'm talking for those which are larger group of more than 40-50% in the communities, rural communities, wedded early and do not have a voice. So again, in the vulnerabilities at different ages when they're living alone, and when we have, especially when talking to consideration of teenage to adolescent to a pregnant lady and old age, throughout, there are a lot of difficulties which are barriers to access health. And as a result, they're not used into research. So I think all over the world, women are primary caregivers, more so in the LMICs, and suffering chronic illnesses, malignancy, mental illnesses, which are on the forefront. The role strain occurs in the females much more, and the role conflict occurs because we find we are entrusted with these roles, we are not able to do so. So caregiving role of women is highly undervalued, and research should be on the agenda set by the community, exploring ways to improve communication, negotiation within family, and empowering women to have a say in the matter without, in a way, causing imbalance, cultivating leadership traits, and creating environment for education and engagement. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and I'm open for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vina, for that excellent presentation. I'm taking over from Julia, who's had to be evacuated. There's been an earthquake in Sumatra, and she's on the 12th floor of our hospital, and it moved. So so Julia sends her apologies, and I'll take over for now. Now, her name is still there, so but I think she's probably not connected anymore. Now we'd like to open the floor to questions to Vina.
So I see one, Deepa, in the Q&A. Maybe I can read that out.
Okay.
So it says, really interesting lecture, thank you. Thinking about the issue of consent and how certain communities may even think about time very differently, or where women may have constraints that are not understood. Are local IRBs able to pick up these issues? If not, how should this be addressed?
It's a very long question. Can you repeat?
Yeah,
I understood
sure.
the last part of it.
Yeah. So I think the question is about how, when thinking about consent, communities, it says communities may think about time very differently, or women may have constraints that are not understood. Are local IRBs able to pick up on these issues? So I take this really as like, how do you think local IRBs, or any IRB for that matter, is well equipped to be able to take into account the kind of unique considerations that you raised in your talk relating to gender, and yeah, how do you think IRBs?
The local IRBs are quite sensitive to this, and they do. In fact, they even have a talk with a researcher how best they can make changes so that they are more applicable, more current. But a guarded opinion about the consent forms is, again, sometimes a long form puts off a person. So they'll have to sign anything that requires signature, brings another set of apprehension. So we have still not got into that particular mode of first having a detailed discussion. So we can see that where we have where we can improve is a community engagement to a larger extent, especially for the research. So as of that is what is the concern of the IRBs, that you get their signature all right, but are they really aware to that extent? And do you have to have a repeated discussion even after taking their consent, informing them as to what, when, where, then sending them notes which are informal, or so that is what is the concern of the IRBs. In one of the researches, the participant had to come 11 times, and then the IRB was worried how the dates that you give, are they understood? Because sometimes they say yes, but on that particular day they may not turn up. And if you're doing especially a vaccine trial and you want to measure, then it may not be. So we had to sit with them with their lunar solar calendar also and mark the dates and say 5 days after the full moon, 7 days after the new moon, and this you're supposed to come. So that's what the IRB told us, because they are sensitive and they insist that there should be more engagement, but we still need to do the engagement in a exhaustive way, which we're not doing.
Vina, if I may, since we don't have any open questions related to that, we often get asked by IRB the difference between compensation for, say, things like transport, for some of the women that you described who are extremely poor, and to participate in research, to come to the hospital or to research sites may require some form of financial compensation. And how do you separate that from coercion into the research simply because they need the cash?
It's a very good question, Adiba. And there's also blurring lines between the compensation and coercion. But I would go by, has the person understood the risks associated with it? And the person is ready to take the risk. And she's related to be into it. She has joined because I would like to give her enough respect as an individual to make a decision, understanding the facts before her and the risks before her. So above and beyond that, if it would not be like a moral policing, it would be for me, if I were to say, no, this is an exploitation, she's poor, I may not have her into it. But at the same time, it is important that the time as a resource she's utilizing to come. So she has to be, in return, she's to be paid something. So some people do not like to call compensation, they call it reimbursement for the expenses and the food and other things. So there is some sensitivity attached to compensation. So in our IRB, we call it reimbursement. And also you're allowed to give food. And that's the only thing, yeah. So thank you. Does that answer you?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. Joe, do you want to take this question, Michelle?
Yeah, sure. So there's another question here posted in the Q&A, and thanking you first of all for the really enlightening lecture, which we'll all agree with. It says, in a group which has been systematically oppressed for years, how can we ensure that the participation of the women are voluntary and without coercion? They may see the research team as authority figures and that they need to accommodate. So how do you manage the kind of historical legacy of oppression in this kind of context? Yeah.
Actually, when we started with talking to women who were married, newly married, because I took up my job as a lady medical officer, and then I had to do a contraception advice. So we had a lot of elder generation who were coming and shouting at us. In fact, there used to be a small banyan tree under which we used to sit, and we used to gather them around us. We wanted to come out from the office type of things where there would be power inequality. So squatting on the floor under the banyan tree, talking to the newly married ladies about contraception, which brought a lot of anger from other elders of the family. Until one time, it so happened that a young girl who had given birth to the third child died. And it was quite a tragic thing. And I had myself gone for the funeral. And then I told them, what I was saying wasn't very wrong, wasn't I? Was I? I said, because she's such a young girl and she had back to back 3 pregnancies. She couldn't even recover. And in the third, she had a rupture of the uterus. I said, you may think that I'm young to talk because I was hardly 24, 25. And their main grouse was, I wouldn't know about it because I was young. So, but I said, at least consider this. And after that, it was quite a welcome. So we had a lot of discussion. We need to earn the respect to start first for them to listen. And if we can do that engagement with them, then our half of the battle is over. Then they know that they can trust us because we have a sincere way of talking. Now for a tubectomy, once I got into solid trouble because the husband-wife consented, but just before we took the wife for the tubectomy, the entire family of 7 brothers came and they were shouting at us that they said, we don't have children, our brother has. And he has 4 children. He can have 3 more because each of us also can have a child. So who are you to make this decision? They asked me. I didn't make a decision. I only offered them for tubectomy. That was my job. But what happens is, I totally understand. In a society which is totally joined, the decisions are not made by husband and wife. And we also have to be sensitive to the fact that if somebody comes and asks us, we ask the husband, wife, you make up your mind. We haven't wheeled into the OT. Incision has not been given. If you change your minds, yes. They said, yes, we would like to change our minds. We don't want to come for tubectomy. So she was about to be wheeled in, we wheeled her out. So sometimes the pressures are in that direction. But ultimately, she has to live in the joint family. But that she really wants to make, if she wants to make, then we can negotiate, we can dialogue with the family. This time, even the lady said she wanted to. But there was another time when the lady came and told us that I need to have a property because I already have 3 children. I cannot have a 4th. I've just joined a menial work somewhere. So they're paying me well. I need to have a property. So we inserted, even the family didn't know about it. But sometimes we do see which is our boundary within which we can function without destabilizing her from the family. Because we can give her high ideals, what is right from wrong, but that should be carried back to family. Will that work for her? Because we don't want to kind of cause an unrest in a family by what we are saying. But if we are saying something that is really important, sometimes we even call the neighbors. The best way we have talked to is to the neighbors to inform the relatives that this would be the right thing, because we know that they listen to each other's advice. So sometimes these are not very conventional ways, but we have seen which is the best way to dialogue so that she gets the best help in health. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe just another question here that's in the chat. I'll expand on it just a little bit, but the question is about priority setting in research. And as we know, there's been a strong policy position in many national research institutes to push towards more inclusion of women in research over the past 20, 30 years. And oftentimes that's thought of as sort of women as a sort of homogenous category. But I think what you pointed towards in your talk is that there's a lot of diversity in terms of different types of women, rural, urban, people identify differently. So I suppose just to expand a little bit on this comment about priority setting is really how does one, as a researcher or otherwise, address the needs of these diverse communities, and given the strong influences of funders and others who may not see the same kinds of issues. So I don't know if you have suggestions on that.
Thank you very much. It's a very insightful question. So following COVID, we wanted to start something which we would like to explore how COVID impacted different populations. And just on talking to a few of them, we found out there was one transgender person who was talking to me. He had come whether I could give a job. So suddenly we said, why not work with them? So when we just had one meeting, and it was enough for us to realize there is such a gap in the policy and what they get served. So there is something that they are literally invisible in pandemic situations. When the kit is given, emergency food and everything is given, they are denied of it because they changed their sex, but they didn't get the certificate. They didn't get the government papers to say they're now from male to female. So the old name and the new gender did not match. So they were deprived of it. So we said, this is our priority. And we are going to do whatever research it takes, whatever funding we have to apply, we are going to do this area. So I would think if we choose an area, then we can try to use that as a leverage to get, because we're already working with something to get funding. Or rather, if there's already a funding option available, see if we can put this wagon of particular needs into the research already existing, just in order to have some diverse research also carried out, which will have an impact, immediate impact. Because some of these, the efforts needed are minuscule, but the impact is much more. And what were they asking anyway? All that they're asking is their health card. They're asking for the policies to be in place so we can at least mediate those things for them. So I think priority setting would begin when we see the gap, which is so much that we can move in and seize. It's like carpe diem. You seize it, take the opportunity and start working for it. I think it will be very helpful. And if funding is already available for something, you can also include this as one of your objectives to bring to focus that along with this can also be. We could try that. I mean, I would do that if I were to do.
Very nice, thank you. We have another question, just go rapid fire at you. The next one is about the surrogacy bill. So first, another thank you and appreciation for your talk. It says, I was surprised to hear about the bill restricting remuneration for surrogacy. And the question is, to what degree has the bill been influenced by international ethical norms that promote values of altruism without accounting for the power inequalities that further imposes on women? Does the mainstream concept of altruism have any real meaning in these contexts? Yeah.
It's a very good question. And then it sets you thinking also along these lines. Why do we expect altruism only from a particular population, not from everybody? Because I would think It is so wrong for us to think we should not pay for the participants in any research because they shouldn't be lured into it. But I would say, as a researcher, I get some money, I make use of it. So if somebody else is getting money and making use of it, if they understand the nature, the consequences, risks they take, so why should we deny that? Now, when it comes to altruism and the bill restricting them exchange of money, I would say, why don't you regularize it? Why don't you say you have to pay at least this? This is minimum, because that is also a service. If you look at, it's a very invasive way a person is being exploited. Isn't it also not for the person who's making a decision to have a talk in this manner? Because much of these bills ought to have at least some representation of the surrogates already, to have the lived experience. Because I have talked to one of them at least, who was very happy she did it, to a couple who didn't have children. She said, I have 3 of my own children, and this was my aim to do it. But she said, I did use the money well. I did use it to send my daughter for higher education. So I would think today, when we are making bills, we shouldn't be blind to the fact that first, one who's making the bill, that sex is not represented. So how can you make bill for them? It's like how can one decide what sanitary pads can a teenage girl wear being in a policy level? It's difficult, because we need to have representation at every level of those people and at least consider them before you make a decision. Otherwise, it's easy for us to say be altruistic, but then 10 months of their life, they have literally worked at something. And would we do it as policymakers? Would we do it as ministers? Would we do it at least 10 months of our life altruistically? We don't. Then we can't advise it. So somewhere we need to be more sensitive to the needs of the person who is into this, because she finds a value in it. Along with that, she's making use of the money that comes with it. I hope I've answered your question.
Thanks, Vina, very much. Are there other questions or comments? Give a minute.
I have one, Joe. You know, Vina, throughout this COVID pandemic, particularly early on, as the vaccines were being rolled out, there were concerns because studies often exclude women, pregnant women. Given everything that you've said about you know, the situation in low middle income countries, what would be your advice for, you know, places like ours, where the issues that you've brought up to safeguard, including pregnant women in future vaccine and other intervention studies? In a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you. It's a tightrope to walk. I'm not saying the decisions are easy, but then if there is, for instance, take COVID-19, if it wouldn't spare pregnant women, then we had to give it some time or the other. So we need to involve, but I would say, I would be very cautious when I involve the person who is into this trial. Does the person know about it? And because there would be people ready to take risk, and are using them to take risk. So because some or the other, the pandemics are the situations where you have to do it then. There isn't enough time to test and then say, okay, if it failed, then, but then of course you can do it only after you have done on the normal population. Then you would try to do it maybe on the animals, pregnant animals, which are similar, but like I said, the time span is very less. But if the risk of COVID would far outweigh the risk of vaccine, I would say one should go for it with a consent which is very elaborate, and they have walked into it knowing fully well the consequences and the side effects that could go with it. Yeah.
Thank you, Vina. There's just one more question here. I think we have time for it. It's about your thoughts on the issues of vulnerability. And I think just a general question about to what extent researchers consider vulnerability before, during, after research, and maybe you have, I don't know if you have any particular examples from your own work or research or activities that you could comment on this issue of vulnerability and how researchers should be thinking about it. Yeah.
It's actually vulnerabilities from the Greek word vulnare, to mean very easy to be injured. So they are very likely to get injured or harmed by our actions. And they may not be aware of it, but we may be aware of it. So we need to have a window of responsibility towards them, an extra safeguard in place so that they are not harmed by our research. A very simple way I could say was when I started being a researcher, and very early in my career, we had gone house to house survey, making a list of contraceptives used by the newly married women. We wanted to just see the acceptability in how they make a decision. And there was this lady who was using copper tea, and we were talking to her in her backyard. We thought there is nobody around, but from the window, we could see one lady just looking like this and going away. We did not know about privacy or confidentiality at that point. And this lady said she uses copper tea. She got it 3 months back. And when we came out, we see suddenly that, next day when we go on the visit, she's beaten by her mother-in-law. She said, we are expecting the first child. We are having ceremonies to have a male child. And we are praying God and all rituals are happening. You never told us you're using a contraceptive. How can you do that? How can you take this decision? The child is not yours alone. It belongs to the family. So then we came to know we have harmed her in a way. So she is vulnerable. So who are vulnerable? Is sometimes we need to use our own approach to see, okay, in this particular context, she does not have power in the household. She's the one she's beginning her in the hierarchy of household. The daughter-in-law is at the lowest. So now we cannot tell her or make her divulge her information in front of the family members. Similarly, with the communities we are working with. So the community says, people come and draw our blood. I said, why? What? Then they said, we will let you know, but they never come back with results. That is vulnerability. And again, with the small children, pediatric age group, and then we are advising them something, and they really take it that as though it's a gospel truth. Like my daughter once told me, that this particular paste is the only thing I have to use because the dentist told me. And we were in a small rural area then, about 20 years back. We looked for it, we didn't get it, but she said, no, only this or nothing. Because that is how people look at a product in research, as it is something that is going to be so useful and your life depends on it. So that is something that it could be very aged people, or it could be mentally ill, but it's our experience that tells us the vulnerability what we fix today may not be so with all populations. In some of them, we have even found prisoners to be very outspoken, they're understanding right, they are saying correctly, and then they're ready to take one stand or the other. Whereas in others, we find they're not even vocal about it. They don't know their rights. They feel in the hospital, if somebody asks them to take part in clinical trial, they have to. They don't even know they have a choice to say no. So there is a vulnerable person. He may not fit into our definition of vulnerability, but suddenly we find he is very likely to be harmed if he doesn't know what he's going in for. So thank you.
Very well. I think with that, we're going to have to wrap up. And on behalf of my colleagues, Deepa, Julia, Jeremy, and others, just thank you again, Vina, for joining us today. And thanks to everybody else.
Thank you.
This was a very interesting and important talk, and we're very grateful for your time and for sharing. So thanks again. Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And for everyone else, there's a brief post-webinar survey that will pop up. If you're interested, you're welcome to provide some feedback. We do appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good day.
Many thanks, Vina. That was excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We were worried about not getting enough questions. In the end, we ran out of time.
That's right. Very encouraging to have so many questions here.
Yes, indeed. Well, hope to meet you in person someplace sometime.
Sure. We'll do that.
Right. Take care. Thanks, Vina. Bye.
Thank you.